When it comes to wildlife conservation, the first thoughts that usually come to mind are probably habitat restoration, population surveys, captive breeding, and reintroductions. But one critically important component to wildlife conservation is the human element. How does the general public perceive the species in question? This can often make or break conservation efforts, because if the public sees our efforts as restrictive or dangerous, they're going to make progress difficult to achieve. A dam project being held up because of an endangered minnow, ranchers worried about reintroduced wolves killing their cattle, and potentially man-eating crocodiles bouncing back from the brink of extinction. The latter example is where my friend Brandon Sideleau comes in. Apex predators like crocodiles are in dire need of some good PR, but before we can adequately do that work, we need to learn all we can from hard data. For years, Brandon has been collecting those data and building up the CrocAttack database. He scours news reports from around the world and travels to remote locations to find information on unreported crocodile attacks. By identifying the contributing factors that lead to human-crocodile conflict, we can begin to identify viable solutions. Until then, if you live around crocodiles, please just stay out of the water.
My name is Brandon Sideleau. I am a crocodile specialist and a PhD candidate at Charles Darwin University here in the top end of the Northern Territory in Australia.
So how does a punk kid from Los Angeles end up in the top end of the Northern Territory studying crocodiles?
Well, I always liked crocodiles from a young age, but that came from, liking dinosaurs, which most, not most, I don't want to paint a broad brush there, but a lot of kids like dinosaurs for obvious reasons. And when I was a kid, crocodiles seemed to be the closest thing to living dinosaurs. I was born in '83, and I think, when I was a kid, it wasn't common knowledge that birds actually were dinosaurs. We knew they were related to dinosaurs, but we didn't know they were dinosaurs. At least it wasn't common knowledge where I grew up. But now we know that, so, but I thought, crocodiles looked like what I would see in documentaries, where they had the fake dinosaurs before Jurassic Park. So long story short, that's what got me into crocodiles. And then when I was in college, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was always interested in crocodiles. I would come here to Darwin almost every year to do photography, and mostly, photographing salties, obviously. I always wanted to see a saltwater crocodile. So first chance I got, this is the first place I ever went out of the United States by myself. And saw a saltwater crocodile, did photos for a while, and then I came up with the idea of doing a crocodile attack database, and things went from there. Yeah, so it took me a while to, I didn't start doing my undergrad until I knew what I wanted to do, because I didn't want to, so many people did something like psych or something, and then, so I decided to wait and then do it, and then, now I'm finishing up my PhD soon, and then hopefully I'd like to go into academia, working crocodiles that way, start doing things, a lot of different areas.
You mentioned the crocodile attack database. What are some of the key findings you've found from compiling that database?
Well, early on, it was believed, like in 2010, when I started the database, it was believed that saltwater crocodiles, for example, Crocodilus porosus, was only responsible for, maybe 5 to 10 human deaths a year, range wide, and 20 to 30 attacks. I believe the IUCN CSG website said 20 to 30 attacks total, not fatal attacks, but 20 to 30 just attacks in general, range wide, which I started doing research, and I started realizing, wow, there's a lot more than that. And it wasn't getting reported in the English language news. And some of it was getting reported in the Indonesian language news. A lot of this was in Indonesia because Indonesia makes up the bulk of the current saltwater crocodile range. So I started realizing it was pretty bad there. I had been hearing reports from Papua New Guinea, but we couldn't get any data. And then I also, one of the really interesting findings along with the attacks was distribution. We started realizing that saltwater crocodiles are extinct in a lot of areas where they're still listed as being present. This was kind of known, but kind of not known. I mean, there wasn't, people thought there still might be some crocodiles in Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand, but there weren't. Unfortunately, the truth is, in most places except like Palau, because the large saltwater crocodiles are pretty rare there. In most places where you have saltwater crocodiles, you're gonna have attacks. That's just the way it is, or at the very least, conflict with people. That's if you have a viable population. And even areas where there's very few, like in Lombok near Bali, they had just a handful of crocodiles moved in, recolonized, and they had a man killed. So, unfortunately, that's what happens. So you can kind of tell where they're at and where they're not at by attacks, whereas you can't necessarily do that with a lot of other species. That was the big, those were the initial findings. And then now, I got a lot more data. There's been a lot more, the project's expanded significantly. I still focus mostly on saltwater crocodiles, but the database is for all species. But my PhD is looking at saltwater crocodiles range-wide.
So what are some of the major contributors to attacks? Like, why are people being attacked?
Well, the major overarching factor is poverty, without question. There's a reason why attacks are so rare in Australia, especially deaths. And that is because people here aren't using the waterways for bathing. They don't need to wash their clothes in the rivers. They don't need to, they don't need to go into the water up to their waist with a fishing net just to get their meal for the evening or for their livelihoods. People do that, but they don't have to do that. And when they do that, they typically do it in areas where they're, closer to the city where there's not as many crocodiles. But, it is still amazing that more people don't get attacked. We do have good management here, and we do have good crocodile education, the CrocWise program. But that helps, but the major factor is poverty. In these other countries, people have to use the waterways. And no matter what, you can educate them all you want. You can have management, but if there are crocodiles there, a viable population, and people are using the waterways, even a very small number of crocodiles, as we've seen in West Timor, there's a very, very small number of crocodiles. It's 0.3 individuals per kilometer, non-hatchlings. And, they've had some years 17 people killed, And so if you have a lot of people in the waterways, you're going to have a lot of attacks. And that's just as simple as it is. And that's not the case here. So
what are some of the biggest challenges with compiling attack data?
Well, early on, as the internet has gotten much more prevalent and widespread in the world, it's become a lot easier. But early on, there wasn't as much. And actually, one of the papers I've been working on with a few co-authors, we haven't submitted it yet because we wanted to wait until the end of 2025. But we looked at how internet access had increased in Indonesia versus attacks increasing. And it correlates perfectly almost. But of course, correlation doesn't equal causation. But it is interesting to see that, it's entirely possible that in some areas attacks have not increased, but rather reporting has increased. In some areas, attacks definitely have increased because we have comprehensive data, like Sarawak, Sabah, and Malaysia, and some parts of Indonesia. But in other areas, like in Papua New Guinea, when I went in and did my research in the field, attacks have not increased. They've just been bad for a long time. It's just kind of the way it is. And it's like that in a few areas where people are really heavily dependent on the waterways. Like in Papua New Guinea, people are more dependent on the waterways than they are in Western Indonesia. In those areas, it's more fishermen getting attacked. But in Papua New Guinea, you got people bathing, you got people washing their clothes. Everything is related to the water because there's no plumbing, there's no wash infrastructure at all. So people are entirely dependent on these waterways the same way they would have been, 150 years ago. And that leads to a lot of attacks, even if there's not a lot of crocodiles around.
How does knowledge about crocodile attacks and, putting the information into the database, how does it help to conserve crocodiles?
Well, when people are getting attacked by crocodiles and we don't know about it, often people are going to take matters into their own hands. In a lot of these areas, people just say, look, we're just going to kill them. Not always. You have areas where they play a cultural role. But even there, there's only so much people are going to tolerate. If they're losing, 10, 20 people a year, people are going to lose tolerance. And so I thought it was important that we know about where this is happening, not to demonize crocodiles, but to protect crocodiles, because people will kill them, and to protect human lives as well. But that goes without saying, I feel like. And I think the crocodiles are often a part of the equation that is discounted a little too much for my liking. I think it's important that we conserve crocodiles and protect humans, not one or the other. And it's possible. It's very difficult, more difficult in some areas than others. But it's very important, because we just let it go and we don't address these issues and we just let them happen. Again, somebody's going to take matters into their own hands, and it's going to happen without the knowledge of the outside world. So,
What are some of the key pieces of advice that you would have for people living in or visiting crocodile country to avoid dying?
well, if you're in an area with crocodiles, just stay out of the water. And stay away from the water. Stay at least 5 meters from the water's edge. There's one thing, there's a few things that I would like to dispel in terms of myths. You can always outrun a crocodile on land. The idea that a crocodile is going to chase you down over a long distance is utterly absurd and frankly pretty hilarious. People have watched too much, what was that movie, Primeval, where they had the Gustav, who doesn't exist, or at least there's no evidence Gustav exists, chasing that one actor, what's his name, the 7-Up guy. And I remember I saw this on TV at late night one time. I was like, that is the most utterly absurd thing I've seen. I thought, okay, it's funny. People think it's funny. No, people take it seriously. They think that crocodiles can do that. Especially a big crocodile, really big crocodile is going to be very, very slow on land. They can charge out of the water very quickly, but it's over a short distance. So when they say, oh, they're faster than a racehorse, that's over a very short distance. And then the lactic acid builds up. If it's a big crocodile, it's got a lot of weight, those little arms. It's not, it's not going to chase you down, so the danger zone is within, 5 to 10 meters from the water's edge. It really depends. I would stay 10 meters away just to be safe. And don't go swimming in an area that has crocodiles. It's really simple. It's a lot easier. There's very few, when it comes to like tigers, for example, that's a species that would be very difficult to work with in terms of conflict, because they can get you anywhere. You can't just say stay out of the water with tigers, because they can get you up a tree, they can get you anywhere. And that's why tiger-human conflict is such a complex issue. Crocodiles, theoretically, it's easy. It's just that in many areas, people are so reliant on the waterways that it becomes a major problem. And crocodiles end up killing more people than tigers because of that. And also, tigers are obviously much rarer now. But in a place like Australia, here, there's no excuse. And I don't want to be victim blaming, and I'm not victim blaming, but every single attack in Australia is preventable, all of them. It's usually, almost always, the result of either victim error or the parents of the victim making the error, because the child often doesn't know the danger, and the parent tells them it's safe and they get killed. That's the parent's fault. The only attack I can think of recently, there's 2 incidents that I can think of that weren't necessarily victim error, but they still were human error because it resulted from mistakes on the parts of other people, and that's the one in Wangai Falls. I believe from what I understand, that crocodile was known to be there, and wasn't removed. And it could have been there for a while, and they just didn't see it when they opened it up. We don't really know all of the information, but I think it may have very well been there for a while. And so maybe they just didn't survey well enough when they opened up the pond there. And then there was the very tragic incident with the doctor in Queensland when supposedly, according to the official report from what I read, the bank gave way while he was walking on the bank. But there should have been a sign saying that this bank is unstable. And then furthermore, there was a 5-meter crocodile that was waiting there. And that crocodile would not have been there if it wasn't being fed by people. Saltwater crocodiles don't hang around where people are unless they're being fed. And so if he fell in the water and that crocodile hadn't been fed, chances are it would not have been in that immediate area, and chances are he would have survived. He would have gotten out before. So yeah, still the result of human error. So Australian attacks, American attacks, easily preventable. And by American, I mean USA, not the Americas. But in areas, middle-income countries, low-income countries, it's not always preventable. Yet.
What are some of the efforts being done in those lower-income countries to prevent attacks?
Well, not a whole lot has been implemented yet. The crocodile exclusion enclosures is something they do in Sri Lanka that appears to have made a difference in some areas. They don't have them everywhere, so in some areas it doesn't work. And then, of course, that doesn't work for fishermen. Theoretically, it can for people who are fishing stationary, but most people don't do that. And some people just don't use them. You have men who, especially I've talked to people in Mexico, I've talked to people in Indonesia, and you get a macho attitude. They're like, some of the Indonesian guys told me they take it as a challenge. And so, I don't know how you work with that. And you're like, well, okay, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. But at least you can prevent, hopefully, children and women who are washing clothes and bathing from being attacked. But if a fisherman, doesn't want to listen, then that's it. But yeah, like, there's not a whole lot being done. And some of the stuff that is being done, I don't agree with. There's talks of drastically decimating the crocodile population in certain parts of Malaysia, Sarawak. Not drastically decimating, but basically keeping, bringing them all into protected areas and essentially fencing off the protected areas. And I don't care how big the fenced off area is, that turns them into captive crocodiles. They can dress it up any way they like, but they become captive animals. And there are an okay amount of crocodiles in Sarawak and Sabah, but they aren't fully recovered by any means. There were state or province-wide surveys in Sabah, and the average non-hatchling density was 0.7 individuals per kilometer, and the highest river was 1.7, and that was the Kinabatangan River, which is a protected area, even though it's surrounded by old palm plantations. So a lot of people were killed in Sabah and Sarawak, but more in Sabah. And there's not that many crocodiles. They're there, and you can see them, but it's not like here. It's 0.7 is less than, it's less than 1/5 of the average density here, and less than 1/11 of the density of the Mary River. So yeah, it just doesn't compare. Even Queensland has higher density. It's 1.7 non-hatchlings per kilometer for all of Queensland. So yeah.
Let's do a little bit of role playing. Okay, we're on an ABC News interview. I am your debate competitor, Bob Catter, and I say the only way to prevent attacks is by culling the crocodiles.
I mean, people are entitled to their sexual proclivities. Let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom, as far as I'm concerned. But I ain't spending any time on it, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
What is your response?
Well, culling crocodiles won't prevent attacks unless you eradicate crocodiles. The only way you prevent attacks by removing crocodiles is by virtual eradication. People often talk about wanting a cull here so that they can swim in places they could swim in the 60s and the 70s. A cull, would be like 25%, or even if you do 50%, which wouldn't happen, those water bodies are still not safe to swim in. People were getting attacked here when the population was 50% of what it is now. None of those areas would be safe to swim unless you knock it down to about 10% or 5%. There was a study done here by some of my colleagues at CDU, and they determined that you would have to reduce the population by, I think, 90% to prevent a single attack. So they don't want culling, they want eradication, and they're just dressing it up as a way to seem as though they're being, reasonable, but they're not. They want eradication. And some people think that's, they don't think a crocodile's life is worth anything, or the species in general is worth anything. Obviously, they're ecosystem engineers. They obviously have a financial value for tourism and for the sustainable use industry. So yeah.
It seems like since you've moved to Australia, you've become more of a well-rounded herper. So what are some of the highlights of your herping experience here? And it seems like you do a lot of great photography. So what are the top subjects for you?
Well, thank you first. Well, obviously, coming from California, I didn't get a whole lot of herping in. I know a lot of people, if they hear that, who are watching this, they will be like, "What? There's tons of great herping spots in California." But I lived in Thousand Oaks, which is in Ventura County, and I just, we had Helleri, the rattlesnake, and a few other things, but it just wasn't consistent. And so when I got here, I just went crazy because there's just so much around. Even the cane, the cane toad wiped a lot out, but some things are starting to come back. And when I first got here, I really wanted to see a death adder because I had never seen one. I'd been coming here since 2006, almost every year. And when I moved here in 2022, I still had not yet seen a death adder because I was only here in the dry season. And now, since then, I've probably seen 50. I don't know, a lot. I don't know the exact numbers, but a lot of both species, the floodplain death adder and the rough-scaled death adder. And so those have been really cool, great experiences herping. Obviously, saltwater crocodiles, that's always going to be, and freshwater crocodiles. Seeing crocodiles is always going to be top for me. But then, I've seen a lot of these, a lot of the varanids have been really cool. I've got some photos that I'm very proud of on the Panoptes. Trying to think, there's so many cool, experiences. Really big olive pythons. My wife and I went out herping one night, and we weren't seeing a whole lot, but on the way home, I was driving, and she was looking on the opposite, in the other lane, and I didn't see it in the other lane because I was focused on the road, out near Corroboree Billabong, and there was a massive olive python that was, part of it was off the road, and it took up the whole remaining lane. It was over 4 meters, and we got out and we helped it off the road to make sure it didn't get hit. But that was amazing. And I've seen a few more in that size range. So, there's a certain time of year where it seems like the big females, they're gravid and they're out moving around, and very bitey when you try to help them off the road, because they, obviously they're defending themselves because they think you're trying to hurt them, but we're trying to help them because there's a lot of roadkill up here, unfortunately. And you and I have had some cool experiences last. We had 3 northern browns within about 30 meters of highway, which was something I've never seen before.
It's another northern brown.
They're not a easy species to photograph, which we found out. To be able to photograph them, you need somebody who knows what they're doing, and otherwise you end up in the morgue probably. So if you're lucky, because not sure lucky. If you're lucky, you might survive. But I think the only people who've been killed up here have been northern browns. But so a lot of experiences. Then I've also traveled. Indonesia is real close. So it makes things a lot more convenient to see some of the Indo herps. So Timistoma, which was amazing.
All right. So what's next for Brandon Sideleau?
What's next? Well, hopefully finishing my PhD on time. Things have, I've got about a little over more than a year, about a year and a half until my max submission date. I would like to submit long before that. The problem was a lot of things got held up in Papua New Guinea with getting permits and then going to do the work, and it was a very expensive place, logistically difficult. We did it, but it really wiped a lot of stuff out. And then we were trying to wait on Indonesian permits, wait, and then we found out they weren't happening. So the Indonesian paper I'm going to do based on the data I already have, which I don't require a permit for that because we got it from news articles and from field work that I did have permission to do. So don't need that. So we're going to do that instead of going into, what I was going to do is go into some areas where we were data deficient. They weren't big areas, just little parts of Indonesian Papua and the Aru Islands, basically, that's it, and Wetar. But, just mention that in the paper, and we've had the whole rest. There's like 1,300 attacks or something for the period, so we have plenty of data. Do that, and there's a few other papers I'm looking at. I have an interesting idea. I'm actually going to talk with one of my potential co-authors tonight. I won't say his name just because I don't know if he wants to co-author or not. I don't want to put him on that unless he wants to. And so I've got some interesting ideas in that. Hopefully get them done fast within the next 8 months. I'd like to submit a couple of them in the next 2 months. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of a crocodile tourism next month in Thailand, looking for Siamese crocodiles at a place that has easy to spot Siamese crocodiles. Don't know if I should say it in public yet, so it doesn't get inundated with people, but it apparently is quite easy to see wild Siamese crocodiles in this area, and some other herping type stuff. But pretty much done with field work for my PhD. I'm hoping to do more in the future, maybe a postdoc or something, but for now, done with field work. Predominantly it was in Papua New Guinea, the field work, a little bit in Timor as well, Timor-Leste. So,
where can people find the Crocodile Attack database, and do you have anything else you'd like to promote, your photography or anything like that?
Well, the CrocAttack database is at crocattack.org with no www, just crocattack.org. I've had people try to look for another www and then keep getting this, dead links. It's just crocattack.org. And I'm trying to work on getting it a little more functionality, a little more bells and whistles. But right now it's pretty basic, but there's a lot of good information on there, and the information is well vetted, so it's correct. Not just the attacks, but also some information on the species that are responsible for, probably the top 4 species. You have the saltwater crocodile and the Nile crocodile, obviously kill and attack and injure the most people. The mugger crocodile is the third most, which is, a lot of people don't know that. They kill about 50 people a year, mostly in India. And then you have a massive drop-off, and the fourth is the American crocodile, Crocodile secundus, but you know, on a bad year, it's 5 or 6. I think the 6 is the worst year, and that was, I think, last year. But usually it's like 1 or 2, and that's, or no, like 3, something like that. You know, slightly more than the American alligator and the black caiman, which are pretty equal, depending on the year. But yeah, so there's information on all those species, and then some weird ones, like the Temistomas will occasionally kill people, but it's very rare. But I saw some Temistomas in August, and I can see why sometimes conflict happens in some of these areas. You know, you have a lot of oil palm plantations, you know, aquaculture, just completely inundated in their habitat. And they do get habituated to humans. Even without direct feeding, they will get habituated to humans in those areas. And they can grow very large, very, very large. And they aren't like the Indian Gario, where the snout remains very skinny, even at large sizes. They get the base of the snout, they start looking more like an Orinoco crocodile, you know, in their snout, not in their appearance. But so yeah, they can be dangerous, not like a salty, but yeah. So like where I was in looking for the Temistomas, they had told me that a few people had been attacked by salties. This is 700 kilometers inland, so it's just a nice reminder that if it's tropical and it's in saltwater crocodile habitat, if you're not, you know, if you're under 600 meters, you need to be careful. So yeah.
Perfect. And what about your photography?
I mean, I do a lot of crocodile photography. My goal is to photograph every crocodile species in the wild. Thank you, Matt Shirley, for making that much more difficult. And I want to get good photos too, which is very hard because I've seen 15 species in the wild. I've photographed 15 species in the wild, but I've only got like 8 that I'm really happy with the photos. That means some of them I have to go back, and I'm being really picky, but yeah, like I haven't got any good Nile photos because we were at that meeting in Skukuza in 2016, and there was one Nile crocodile. I swear it must have been the most photographed Nile crocodile in the world because everybody was photographing it. It was the only one we could see from the campsite, and like everybody at the meeting had photographed it. So, you know, not really a special photo, but you can't get out of the car in most parts of Skukuza. So getting close to crocodiles for photos, even with a long lens, is pretty difficult unless you get lucky and they're close to where the road is. So yeah, I'd like to get more Niles, maybe Ethiopia, some of those big ones at Lake Chamo. But the Temistoma was kind of one of my ultimate, or really the ultimate, that I wanted to get in the wild. And I wasn't sure if I would because Tangible Bating is very expensive. But I did find a place, and I'm not allowed to share, according to the guy who brought me there. So I will respect his wishes. So
And is Instagram the best place to see that photography?
Yes, yeah. I try to post only the shots that I'm really happy with, unless it's something that's really rare. I don't do any editing. I'm not bragging. It's just my thing. I don't, and you know, if it's a landscape, I might, but I don't do landscapes really. So it's what you see is what I took. Not even lighting adjustments, and not cropping, nothing. Just if I can't get the shot, I can't get the shot. I like to challenge myself. But yeah, so that's just Brandon Sideleau CrocAttack. In one word, Brandon Sideleau CrocAttack. Sideleau is how you spell my name. But
I'll link to it in the description.
Okay, excellent. And yeah, that's why photos are there, and occasionally I'll post, you know, if I'm in the field doing something, or some crocodile attack graphs and stuff like that. And of course, I was doing a podcast. You and I did one episode together.
I think we did 2. Maybe we didn't. Maybe we didn't put the second one.
Maybe one wasn't out. Yeah, maybe yeah. And then I was doing it by myself for a while, but yeah, and I don't want to talk about who I was doing it with before that. But yeah, so want to get that up and running again soon, hopefully with maybe a different format. But yeah, so
cool. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Brandon, thank you for doing this interview.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks for showing me around the top end here.
Yeah, of course. I think we're finishing the interview just before we get rained out, possibly. But yeah,
we hear some thunder.
Yeah.
All right.
But cool. All right. Thanks.